Greetings and welcome to this week's episode of Bronx Bombers. My name is Joe Rubenstein and it is Tuesday, June 4th, and the Yankees, after an absolutely tremendous May, have won 13 of the last 14 series. They go against Toronto tonight, Tanaka on the hill. They've played much better defense than last year, other than a certain redhead that we'll get to later. The bullpen's been tremendous. They are beating bad teams. They did not do that last year. They've also been dominant in their division. They were not last year. They're hitting with men on base, which they were terrible at last year. They've been striking out a lot less than last year. And I would say, the only weakness at this point on this team is the starting rotation. I mean, as much of a pleasure as it is to see Ottavino, Canely, Holder, Britton, and Chapman work their magic, we're seeing too much of it. I mean, Sabathia, Happ, and Herman have not given us enough length. We've had to use Chad Green as an opener because of a couple of injuries, and that taxes the bullpen too. I mean, Paxton's been great, but his innings have been limited due to that injury. So that's an area to address, starting pitching, and I think that Cashman will address it. I'm not sure Dallas Keuchel's going to happen. I'm hearing the Twins are making a very big play for both Keuchel and Kimbrel. But bottom line, this is a much easier team to root for than last year, for me at least. I mean, they're playing, for the most part, a brand of baseball that's just a pleasure to watch. But look, we're only a third of the way through the season. I mean, we had a great May last year too, and then June was a very different story. But you have to like what you see right now. I mean, this team's never out of a game. They've got some swagger, and, as Mookie Betts said, and Mookie's, in addition to being a great ball player and a great bowler, a championship bowler actually, he's a class act for sure. He said the other day, I think Friday night, that the Yankees just play the game the right way, and they do. You can follow us on Twitter, @BombersPodcast is the handle. You can also send us questions. We'll try to answer in our mailbag segment here on the podcast. You can like us on Facebook, subscribe to our show on Apple Podcasts or Stitcher. Apple is now transitioning from away from iTunes, so we'll refer to it as Apple Podcasts from now on. We're on Spotify as well, and as always, you can send your comments and questions via Twitter or Facebook. Really, however you'd like to engage with us, we love engaging with you. Coming up a little bit later on in our Twitter poll this week, some interesting results when we asked if the current bullpen might be the Yankees' best ever. And I'll answer a fascinating question from one of our followers about the composition of the infield once Didi comes back. That looks like it's going to be on Friday in Cleveland. And in just a minute, we'll get into, first of all, an injury update, and then the good, the bad, and the ugly from this last week of action. All that and more coming up on today's Bronx Bombers. Back in a moment.
Bronx Bombers Trivia. The New York Yankees lost to which team in the 1997 American League Division Series? Was it A, the Seattle Mariners, B, the Boston Red Sox, C, the Baltimore Orioles, or D, the Cleveland Indians? The answer coming up a little bit later in the podcast.
And now here's Joe with this week's main thing.
Betances is expected to face hitters in Tampa this week, and is expected back before the end of the month in the Bronx. So that's great news. So bye-bye, Luis Sessa, hopefully. Didi, as I said, we should see on Friday. Now, Judge, we don't know. I mean, he did hit in the batting cage at Yankee Stadium on Sunday and took some fly balls in right field, a.k.a. Clint Frazier's personal disaster zone. And Judge has flown to Tampa now to continue baseball activities. So apparently, I have no medical expertise, but oblique injuries supposedly can be tough to gauge as far as recovery time. My guess is we probably won't see Judge until after the All-Star break. Jordan Montgomery, remember him? He's expected back in July after undergoing Tommy John surgery pretty much exactly a year ago. He's building strength and velocity, but has not yet faced live hitters. Severino, like Judge, is an open question, even more so actually. He had that rotator cuff inflammation in March. Then he had a grade 2 lat strain. He's not faced hitters yet, so it wouldn't shock me, as I said last time, if we didn't see him at all this year. There seems to be a cloud of uncertainty over the whole Sevy situation, just starting with, first of all, last year, the second half was just terrible. Then there was that playoff snafu where he was late for his bullpen session and then lied about it after the game, despite video evidence, and now, he signs his contract and is injured 2 seconds later. I don't know. I don't like what I'm seeing in that whole situation. And, Yankee fans, they talk about him sometimes like he's a proven ace at the level of like Kershaw or a Verlander. He's not. Or at least not yet. He's been incredibly uneven, actually. He's been mediocre in the playoffs. And last year, as I said, was like Jekyll and Hyde. So we'll see what happens. But honestly, I have a bad feeling about Severino right now. now. Stanton, who had a biceps strain and then, like Severino, injured himself while rehabbing, that was a left shoulder strain, now has calf tightness. So, could he be our new Ellsbury? A perennially injured payroll sinkhole? Open question. I mean, we'll see. We're only on the hook for 13 more years and $330 million, so no big deal, right? Now, a couple of players whose roster relevance I question, Tulowitzki and Byrd, are in various stages of recovery. I do not think we'll see either of them play at all again this year or ever for the Yankees. And Duhar, of course, is on the shelf all year, and he might be the only person in Yankee world not super psyched about Don Giovanni, Urshela, what he's doing right now, because Gio's excellence, really on both sides of the ball, could definitely impact Miguel Andujar's playing time next year or even his future on this ball club. We'll see what happens, but Urshela has just been absolutely phenomenal. Which brings us to the good, the bad, and the ugly. Who stepped up and who stepped in it for the Bombers this week? There's so much good that I could go on for like an hour. The bullpen we'll discuss in our Twitter poll. The infield I talked about last episode, and I'll cover that again in our mailbag segment. So let's focus on a player who I excoriated last year on a routine basis, Gary Sanchez, who, if we were going to give the first third of his 2019 season a movie title, it might be Redemption Road, I would call it. I mean, he's got that look again at the plate. He's like a coiled spring, and he's boosted that average from last year like 100 points, which isn't hard to do. I think he hit 182 last year, but his OPS, on-base percentage plus slugging, is just 5 points shy of 1,000, which is elite. He leads the American League in home runs with 18, and he has 35 RBIs, so he's on pace for 110. I mean, none of that really shocks me. You knew he wasn't as bad as he played last year. He had that groin issue also, but the defensive improvement has surprised me, pleasantly so. It appears to the naked eye that Gary Sanchez is carrying significantly less weight than last year, and that was actually confirmed on a recent broadcast by John Flaherty, the former catcher, who noted that weight loss has had a direct impact on his mobility, and you can see it. I mean, he's just much quicker to block pitches, and he does not lead the league in that category anymore, and he continues to have an absolute gun when he throws to second base. That pickoff of Nunez on Friday was just killer, and it appears that Gary Sanchez has taken last year's failure to heart and made a major effort to become the player that he can be, and you have to applaud that. I mean, there's little doubt that Gary Sanchez should be the starting catcher for the American League in the All-Star game next month. I mean, his current rate of at-bats to home runs is 8.2, so every 8.2 at-bats, Gary Sanchez hits a home run. I mean, the single-season franchise record is 8.5, held by a guy named Babe Ruth in 1920, so that's nice company. And it's a major relief to see this, because it's such an important position, and defense is, as I said, a huge part of why this team is clearly better than last year. I mean, currently on pace to win 107 games, I think. And Sanchez, I mean, he's not Johnny Bench. Let's not fool ourselves. He's not Thurman Munson, for that matter, but he's played very well behind the dish, and the hitting's been out of sight. So it's nice to be able to sing his praises once more, really. And as for these Twitter people that say, oh, if you criticized him last year, you can't praise him this year, actually, you can. And to prove it, I just did. Now, rounding out our good section, just a few quick words about Brett Gardner, another guy who I was critical of last year quite a bit, and who I didn't love the signing, as I've said, but he's really upped his game the last month or so after a slow start. 21 RBIs, on-base percentage 320, solid in the field. So good for him, and what likely will be Brett Gardner's last year in pinstripes. He's been a solid guy from day one, just on a human level, and he gives you quality at bats always. He's been a really good Yankee ever since he came up. I guess he was called up mid-season 2008. And then I think he beat out Melky Cabrera, actually, for the starting center field position the following year, at least initially. But he's been a really good Yankee, and I'm happy that he's playing well. Now, bad is a guy that I've mentioned a couple times here, Luis Sessa, a pitcher I've never liked. He's the new Chasen Shreve. Sessa has become synonymous with mediocrity in my mind, and he's a pitcher that one hopes that Cashman is able to somehow put on that alchemist hat of his and turn Sessa into gold. I mean, to do one of those patented Cashman Houdini moves and trade Luis Sessa for someone who, no one's given a chance to, but then he puts on pinstripes and becomes Babe Ruth, a la Chasen Shreve for Luke Voigt. That's someone in the Cardinals front office has got to have been fired for that deal. I mean, Voigt is a really, really good player. He's actually leading the team right now with a .379 on-base percentage and also leads the team with 39 RBIs. He could easily have made my good section. In fact, let's put him back there. I'm retroactively placing Lucas Voigt in my good section right now. And Chasen Shreve isn't even playing in St. Louis. They DFA'd him in March, and I think he's in AAA right now. But Sessa is just not a good pitcher. I mean, he never has been. He doesn't throw strikes, and when he does, they get hammered. Not a great combo. I mean, he showed flashes early this season, but I don't trust it. And he gave up 3 runs in like the blink of an eye on Sunday against Boston. But he certainly was not helped by the headliner of our ugly section, the defense of Clint Frazier, who, I mean, as far as defensively challenged outfielders, there's just mediocre, there's outright bad, there's terrible, and then there's Clint Frazier. And what his handful of defenders don't seem to realize, anyone who's watched this team this season knows that Sunday was not the first time we've seen this particular horror show, but Sunday was indeed special. It was a nationally televised performance, scary enough to make dogs bark and small children cry. You ever have that classic nightmare where you're in front of a large group of people and you're either naked or you're failing in some way or just falling apart in some humiliating fashion? I think we've all probably had that dream at one time or another, and Clint Frazier's nationally televised apocalypse, really, on Sunday night was like that dream, except sadly it was not a dream, it really happened. I mean, Frazier, in the space of 2 innings, managed to commit a series of just savage acts of just extreme butchery that cost the Yankees 4 runs against our most hated rival. The first was just a ground ball that was hit right at him. Not a difficult play at all, but he just let it go bouncing right past him to the wall. And then he threw wide in another bungled play, trying and failing to nail a runner at home. It was like 20 feet to Romine's right. And then there was a pair of fly balls just completely misread. I mean, one of them, again, I think it was off the bat of Benintendi, which he did this kind of bizarre belly flop in the general vicinity of the ball. I mean, if that was what it took to catch a fly ball, just close your eyes and fling your body in the general direction of the baseball, I think probably most of us could handle that. I mean, but he may need like a basic orientation tour of the outfield and shown where everything is, because he's been taking these bizarre, circuitous routes to both fly balls and ground balls and just letting them go by him consistently. And to make matters worse, after the game, he sent word through the Yankees PR department that he would not be taking any questions. I mean, as someone said on Twitter, this is pretty funny, how fitting, he can't even field questions. But the Yankees are very rigorous as far as making their players media savvy, media friendly. I mean, the players must answer questions in good times and bad, but I guess Frazier, remember, he came up with the Indians and he was part of that Andrew Miller trade, but I guess he didn't get the memo. And this can't sit well with Brian Cashman, who hates drama, who hates negative back pages that Frazier just punted on the post-game interviews after that game. So thankfully, we have other options. There's Cameron Maybin, who's played pretty well. I wouldn't even mind seeing the Yankees throw the dice on Thairo Estrada out there, but Frazier's defensive ineptitude in right field and left field is not sustainable. It's not acceptable. It's not survivable. I mean, that was a fright show out there on Sunday, guys. That was Halloween in June, and you can't place the burden on your teammates again to answer for you when you perform like that. You got to man up and answer the questions, and the media in New York does not forgive or forget that kind of treatment. And Clint Frazier, by doing that, turned a 1 or 2 day story into an ongoing saga. I guarantee it. So, I mean, there were apparently some scouts in Baltimore a couple of weeks ago scouting Frazier, where he did hit a bunch of home runs. I mean, his bat has been pretty good. So maybe there's a deal to be had. He's not untalented, but you want good return. But it did seem on Sunday night that it felt like he lost the Yankees fan base that night. He lost the New York media, certainly, and Twitterverse as well. They used to call him Red Thunder, and now they're calling him Red Blunder. I'm not, but some people are. So, I mean, it was quite something to behold on Sunday night. And I don't know if the concussion aftermath is part of it. I hope not. And I don't dislike him as a person, of course. He seems like a good young man, but he's got to improve, or his career is going to be definitely impacted by his inability to handle routine plays in the outfield. Back in a moment.
And now the answer to today's Bronx Bombers trivia question. The New York Yankees lost to which team in the 1997 ALDS? The answer? D. The Cleveland Indians. And now, here's Joe with this week's Twitter poll.
Yes, this week's Twitter poll results are in. We asked you this. Is the 2019 Yankees bullpen the best collectively in franchise history? And 74% of our followers on Twitter at Bombers Podcast said yes, and 26% said no. So, as most of you know, the role of the bullpen has changed dramatically over the past 100 years. From the old days when starters frequently pitched in relief. Some Yankees who did that would be Lefty Gomez in the 30s, Ali Reynolds in the 40s and 50s, and then fast forward to the 70s when you started to see more specialization. That's a decade when the Yankees acquired Sparky Lyle from Boston. That was an absolute heist. That was in 1972. The Yankees traded Danny Cater and a player to be named later. Danny Cater was a totally forgettable first baseman. And they got Sparky Lyle, who became the first reliever to ever win the Cy Young Award in 1977. And the following year, the Yankees signed Pirates free agent Goose Gossage, who became probably the most dominant closer of the 70s. That bullpen in the 70s was the first real monster bullpen in franchise history, and that was a big part of those two championships in 77 and 78 that I remember very fondly. And the Yankees wouldn't really have another monster bullpen like that until the Torre years, when they developed the greatest reliever in baseball history, Mariano Rivera, and after using him as a setup man for John Wetland during the 96 championship run, they changed him to the closer and then assembled a very sturdy supporting cast behind him, including Jeff Nelson, Mike Stanton, a couple others, Graham Lloyd, Ramiro Mendoza. But now, of course, the specialization has reached full flower, given what sabermetrics has revealed, namely that the third time through the batting order is when the vast majority of starters falter, those not named Justin Verlander, that is. So the complete game, for a pitcher has gone the way of the dodo bird, and a 5 or 6 inning start is now the new normal. And you've got every minor league system developing pitchers whose only job is to come out of the pen for 1 inning and throw gas. But this is the third year in a row, 2019, that the Yankees have had the best bullpen in baseball, with Chapman, formerly Robertson, now Ottavino, who's even better, Canely, Chad Green, Holder, and of course Betances, who might be the best of them, but he's currently on the shelf. And so with all these guys firing on all cylinders right now, except Betances, Aaron Boone, who I'll give him credit, he seems to have improved from last year as a manager. I think last year he often stayed with starting pitchers too long who were faltering, but he does not do that this year. So I think he's learned, but he just has so many weapons now with the bullpen that it's hard for him to make a wrong move at this point in time. And suddenly he's being talked about with all our injuries and how the Yankees have done. He's being talked about as possible manager of the year. And Cora up in Boston is starting to get some bad press. Funny how that works, right? But this season, which started rocky for our bullpen, has been nothing short of miraculous. I mean, just talking ERA, you've got Ottavino at 1.3, Canely at 1.5, Chapman at 1.52, Britton at just over 2, and Chad Green, after a stint in the minors, appears to be settling down. And as I said, that's without Betances, who could be with us by the end of the month. So just based on ERA, this is, as of now, the best of these past 3 years. And, just talking ERA alone, better than 98. But remember, 1998 was smack dab in the middle of the steroid era, the height of that whole mania, really. That was the year of the McGuire-Sosa hype, remember, which in retrospect was kind of like this debacle, really, just totally drug-fueled media hype. But still, the Yankees pen in 98 managed, during that franchise record 114-win season, to go 28-9 with a league-best 3.76 ERA. Rivera was just off the charts that year, and in the postseason, in 1998 and 99, Rivera made 18 playoff appearances and World Series appearances without allowing a single run. So, my answer to my own poll as to whether this is the best ever 2019, Not yet. That's my answer. It isn't yet, but it's very possible. The consistency must remain throughout the season. The postseason is a second unknown. I mean, last year, the bullpen against Boston, mostly the same guys as this year, they were actually pretty good. I mean, it was the starters who were horrendous. Happ, Severino, and Sabathia. So we'll see how this plays out through the summer into the playoffs. The 2019 bullpen, as of this moment, and again, the season's only a third complete, but when you look at the ERA, you look at the strikeouts per nine, if they maintain that, they'll certainly be in the conversation for best ever, no question about that. And as I've said, our pen, combined with our infield defense and a much more balanced offensive attack, have made this team, in my opinion, significantly better than last year's team, and a definite candidate for a deep championship run, and who knows, maybe even number 28. We'll see. But there's still a long way to go. And the Astros, the Dodgers, a couple other teams look pretty good. So, Minnesota does not scare me. The Yankees have handled them for years. I mean, look up the Twins on Wikipedia. Under owner, you'll see it. New York Yankees. All right, from this week's mailbag, our question of the week here on Bronx Bombers comes from Tanya in Glen Cove. And by the way, you can find us on Twitter, @BombersPodcast is the handle. Send me a DM or shoot me a message on our Facebook page. If you have any questions you want to have us answer on any future episodes, we are more than happy to do so. And Tanya writes, what will we do with all of our infielders once Didi comes back? First base is set with Luke, but with DJ, Glaber, Gio, and even Estrada all playing so well offensively and defensively, I am worried about disrupting our chemistry, and I certainly hope we do not trade any of them. Well, thanks for that question, Tanya. It's a very good one. Bottom line, there's no way that you can take out either Gio or LeMahieu from this lineup for anything other than an occasional off day. Those two guys are absolutely crucial weapons. Their ability to get on base balances out the power of Sanchez and Voit beautifully and gives us the kind of balanced offensive attack that, frankly, worked so well for Boston last year. And they're both defensively brilliant. I don't know who's better. I think it's whoever you happen to be looking at the time. So thankfully, Tanya, we're an American League team, and we have that DH spot. And in all likelihood, that DH spot will be a revolving door. Voigt's probably the weakest defensive infielder at this point, although he certainly improved over last year. And obviously, there's going to be days like Sunday where Romine catches and Sanchez is the DH, but DJ LeMahieu can play first base. So you can give Voit a day off here and there, or DH him, and play LeMahieu there. I mean, Gio doesn't really play any other infield position other than third base, so I think he's pretty much our third baseman this year, other than a day off or a DH stint here and there. As far as Estrada, I agree. I love what I've seen from him. 50 plate appearances, hitting .304 with 3 home runs and 11 RBIs. He had that big bases clearing double a couple of weeks ago in Tampa, and that's off the bench, which is incredible. He's also a viable threat as a base stealer. Boone has used him as a pinch runner as well, but there's no reason, Tanya, to trade him at this point. He's only 23. And they can just send him down to the minors to further refine his game. Not that I think he needs it, but I agree with you. They must retain this player, Thairo Estrada, at least for now. So the odd man out could be Kendrys Morales, who I like as well. But I mean, he said he had a breakout game against Boston on Saturday. Very good clubhouse presence. Obsessively scouts opposing pitchers and shares that data with his teammates. I don't see a spot for him once Didi comes back on Friday. And if there's going to be a trade package, I'd certainly rather include him at 35 years of age in the package than Estrada. And I think the Bombers will probably cut ties with Morales before any of the other players that we've mentioned, along with Tulowitzki, who's still out with that calf strain. But bottom line, Tanya, these are good problems to have, and this kind of depth. And these situations, they do have a way of working themselves out a lot of the time, one way or another, especially given the fact that LeMahieu is a true, super utility guy that can play any infield position, literally. I mean, that was the plan when the Yankees signed him, for DJ to be kind of a rover, and that's, I think what it'll end up being when Didi comes back. You really can't overstate the tremendous value that he's given to this team. I mean, far more than Manny Machado has given to the Padres at a fraction of the cost. So, Tanya, I would just enjoy the fact that we have so many weapons. Enjoy the fact that we now possess one of the very best defensive infields in the American League after having one of the very worst last year. I think we're only second probably to Houston right now. And bottom line, I mean, re-adding a player like Didi Gregorius to our roster with his skills on both sides of the ball, his tremendous clubhouse presence, that can't be a bad thing. And that'll do it for this week's episode of Bronx Bombers. Again, don't forget, you can subscribe to this podcast on Apple Podcasts or Stitcher. Find us on Spotify. Follow us on Twitter. @BombersPodcast is the handle. Like us on Facebook as well. And thanks so much for joining us. We'll see you again on June 15th. Take care.